us to return to the stage in the history of public speaking. I really was quite tongue-tied there, Chris, and I just want to complete a thought before going on to why I'm standing here right now. As a little boy, there was a very popular show starring the great comic Groucho Marx. It was impromptu. He'd have guests, he'd interview them, and they would compete for a $50 or $100 prize. That's how long ago it was. And he had a man up there at one point who was a Texan and a rancher, and asked him a few questions, and then he said, and I'm a little kid, but I remember, I get that this is funny in the adult world. He said, so have you been a cattleman all your life, or haven't you lived that long yet? And I'm looking at the award and realized this is a Lifetime Achievement Award. I am still here. It doesn't stop here. I intend to continue living this lifetime and hope to continue contributing. So Chris, again, thank you so much for that honor. I had thought when Chris first asked me to make some remarks on what happened with Left at Eastgate and what was my perception of my co-author, Larry Warren. He asked me in 2019. I said, no, I really wasn't interested. I had dealt with it, processed it, spent a year apologizing to people who I owed an apology to, I thought, to doing interviews, allowing any question to be asked, writing a long response to what I felt had happened, and then moved on. And Chris, with respect, asked me again, closer to the mark, and I thought, you know, this is for me past history, but for some people it's not. And if I owe any audience the opportunity to hear me out on some thoughts about it, and then ask whatever questions they wanted to, it should be an audience in the United Kingdom rather than the United States. This story and working on it with this particular author brought me a lot of attention, made me quite well known, and was the source of some remarkable experiences that I would have never had otherwise. And when the book was engulfed in scandal, major scandal, in fact, probably more so than any book in the history of UFO-related publications, which is a dubious honor. It affected me in ways that were not positive and made me kind of withdraw from public life for a period of time. And so I ultimately decided, yes, let's do it, but I'm not going to prepare some well-tailored PowerPoint. I'm not going to script it. I'm not going to work from notes. And get up there and speak from the heart and see how it goes. Many years ago, 35 years ago, I was about a dozen years into this work. My greatest credit, so to say, was I was working as the assistant to one of the best known and most respected people in the field, who went on to be my most important mentor, a man named Bud Hopkins. I had spoken at a handful of conferences. I had had 2 articles published, paid $100 each, making me a professional in my mind, and I guess in reality. And I was looking for a project I could really sink my teeth into. I felt I was ready to undertake the possibility of writing a book. And that summer, 1987, MUFON, the big UFO organization, Mutual UFO Network, had one of their annual symposia, but it was a special one. It was the 40th anniversary of Roswell, Kenneth Arnold, and the modern age of UFO sightings. As most of you know, in a month or so, we have the 75th anniversary of these seriously historic events and the advent of this point in human evolution. Anyway, I went to this conference. It was held in Washington, D.C. It had quite an impact on me. One of my mentors, Stanton Friedman, gave what I thought was the best research paper I had ever heard. And it was on the secret life of a man who was involved in a working group around Truman called MJ-12. His name was Donald K. Menzel. He was the professor emeritus of astronomy at Harvard, so a respected academic, but he had a secret life within the American intelligence community. Anyway, I also heard a man speak named Larry Warren, who alleged that he was one of the witnesses to a series of events that took place in Suffolk in late December over several consecutive nights that we've come to call the Rendlesham Forrest UFO Incident. It used to be called the Bent Waters Incident after the base name around which it happened. And I thought it was a compelling talk. I knew who he was because the story broke here in October of '83 in the News of the World, and in the States within a month or so after. We ran into each other in the hallway the day after he spoke, and the day after I had appeared as a panelist on a discussion about abductions. And I thought, I want to interview this guy. He already had an agenda, which he told me about later, which was he felt I was the person that he should write a book with. I was not aware at the time that he had already been passed on by 3 other authors who, I think it's fair to say, kind of figured out that there were problems with his account. And part of the problem with his account and with the thread of our relationship and the narrative that he laid out is that the truth, wherever existed, was so often and so skillfully mixed with exaggeration, confabulation, which is a mixture of truth and fiction, and simple lies. You should know about me that I was the perfect person for somebody like this to connect with to produce the result they were after, which was a book injecting themselves to a degree into a story that they may or may not have been a part of. The variables I still haven't figured out completely, but I was lucky enough to grow up as a rather happy kid with a very supportive family at a more innocent time, encouraged in the things that I was strong in, with good role models, and as an adult emerged into this world as somebody who was basically pretty trusting. I was training myself to do investigative work, but a problem for people who are quote-unquote fairly nice in doing investigative work is sometimes where you should dig down deeper and exert a more critical facility, you accept an account because you're conditioned to accept people at their best. If they let you down, you change your opinion. But the one thing that I don't know if I was capable of anticipating, and if I was completely out of touch with it, was somebody who was looking for a co-author to intentionally deceive from the get-go, to assist them in the notoriety and fame, if you will, that they were seeking. It didn't occur to me early on when a number of what should have been real red lights signaled that I needed to reevaluate. Examples were shortly after we met and decided to work together, Larry told me he had a degree in communications from the University of Connecticut. Fine. And I simply took his word for it. Well, why not? You know, who's going to lie about having a college degree? Well, somebody who wants you to think they have a college degree but don't. And within a year or so, I understood his timeline well enough from the time he left the Air Force till when we met, because I know he went into the Air Force from high school, that I understood that even if he had been going to night school, he couldn't have gotten that degree. And what did I do about it? I let it go. I figured, you know, I have a degree, painting and film history, which of course is crucial for UFO investigation. but maybe, he just wanted me to feel that he was that better educated, no big deal. He alleged that the retinas of his eyes had been badly burned when the UFO, he alleged to be part of witnessing on the third night, appeared with a blinding flash of light, and then had I think it's Air Force Form 490. It's basically an appointment form for a medical checkup. That was a big part of the narrative. His eyes bothered him immediately after, and like 5 weeks later or so, when the appointment came up at Lincoln Heath Air Force Base Clinic, there's this wonderful card. I had seen the actual one. I had a copy of it. I still do for that point on. And the magic words for me were written in OPTI/ret/burn/EXP, optical retinal burn exposure. Very exciting. It's physical evidence. It was signed by a real doctor who happened to work at Lincoln Heath Clinic at the time. It was for many years part of the slideshow and then the PowerPoint of physical evidence. It didn't seem like a really big deal to me that the opti-retinal burn exposure was written in a different handwriting. And had I checked on the doctor, again, I would have found that they were authentic and at the base at the time, but it took my dear friend, who some of you heard speak yesterday, Sasha Christie, who should be tremendously acknowledged in her really turning the story around, because she was the one who began, as some of you did, as somebody who had tremendous respect and admiration for my co-author, myself, and the book we had produced. And at a point where he had lost his bed sitting room, she and her partner invited him to stay with them, and their good-heartedness was really not returned in kind. Be that as it may, she established that. She was the one who established that he had not gone to university by simply contacting the university and finding out that no one with any permutation of his names had ever attended. But the doctor who signed off on that eye exam, she chased him down. In the southwestern part of the United States, he's an osteopath, a bone doctor. Now, at a busy Air Force clinic, I'm willing to concede maybe people double up, but I never bothered to check that out. Early on in our friendship building, and I never intended to become friends. It was a byproduct of working hard with somebody that you begin to think is truly heroic and is fighting the establishment and has an important thing to say, and you want to help them say it. Every month, for a weekend, he'd come to New York, sleep on my couch, we would do interviews, we'd work on our chapter material, like co-authors do. And one particular time early on, he came in, a new pair of glasses, very retro, very John Lennon, asked me what I thought of them, thought they looked great. At a certain point, disappeared into the bathroom for a bit, and as one does, sometimes I picked them up, and I put them on, just did it. And I realized I was looking through absolute non-prescription glasses, not a hint. And he came out and saw me wearing them and got extremely angry. Demanded that I give them to him. I said, made a comment that they were not prescription. And he insisted in very loud terms that they were, which caught me off guard. It's, a fashion accessory. You think you look good in glasses, that's great. But you're not telling the truth. Anyway, I think the very best thing that happened for Larry in terms of securing my full participation and developing a habit of overlooking small conflicts was on the very first evening of our very first visit to Suffolk. We went for a week in February of 1988, and I thought this was going to be our only visit. We'd come to England. That made me certainly look like a more serious aspiring author. We had, on that evening, walking back from a visit to the base to our B&B about a mile or so away, a multiple UFO sighting that culminated with a structured series of lights appearing at the far end of a farmer's field. To this day, that night of February 18th, 1988 is one of the most memorable of my life. When it began, being a good aspiring young investigative writer, I had a micro cassette recorder in each pocket. New tapes, new batteries, redundancy. Machines break down on you, and I wanted to make sure I could record anything that came up as it came up. And we recorded our, just what we were seeing, everything from small star-sized flying objects to discs hovering above the forest to dropping into the forest. I know at a certain point I went into a certain level of physiological shock. Many of you are familiar with the wonderful organization, the Samaritans. You have walk-in centers all over the UK. I'm very proud to have been an American Samaritan volunteer for 8 years with a number of necessary breaks, almost entirely over the arc of the time that I was working on this book. And I must say it helped me to manage my own stress, as well as it's a wonderful training, and I'm very proud of that fact. But all of a sudden I have to confront the fact that this is 5 or 6 miles from the alleged site of his incident, that I'm no longer the objective chronicler. I'm now part of the story, and I have very mixed feelings about it. But I felt, you either have to take him seriously or not. And then the way I rationalized around it was, I knew that he was drinking more than one should. He writes about it, and I thought very courageously in the book. And it was so easy to interpret that as because of going up against the establishment, the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, the National Security Agency, the public at large, and being the whistleblower, so to say. And to whatever degree he was or wasn't involved, or to whatever degree he was aware of the accounts of others and made them his own or partially his own. One of the key, most enigmatic witnesses in the story is a man named Adrian Basinza, who shared an account with Larry of his being taken underground to a secured facility and interrogated, obviously put through a certain amount of mental gymnastics. Did Adrian really go, or was it mental? Did Larry go, or did he use Adrian's account, because Adrian made it clear that he was never going to talk about this in public? Then my assuming that there was an aspect of this that was post-traumatic stress because it fit into my scenario. So I read a number of articles on post-traumatic stress disorder, and that fit into the matrix as well. Anyway, at a certain point, the book is published. 9 years later, does no better or worse than most UFO books in America, but becomes a smash bestseller here. 13 or 14 cities speaking tour, a month traveling all over the UK. For part of the summer of 1997, our book was number 6 on the national bestseller list, and there were only one bestseller list then, not best graphic novel, best self-help book, etc. And at that same period of time, a book by one of my all-time favorite novelists was number 8. That was a book called Taylor of Panama by John le Carré. And being ahead of John le Carré on the bestseller list is probably the most paranormal experience of my life. Anyway, over the next years, I got opportunities to speak and travel, and then Larry's story started to unravel. And part of the complication was what I felt was a legitimate business that he had gotten into of rock and roll memorabilia, buying and selling it. It emerged in ways that I actually saw the evidence of, that he was fabricating this memorabilia and fabricating the provenance, and had been studying graphology and handwriting and had become a professional forger repeatedly. At this point, I had to start calling him on some of this stuff, and he refused to answer a number of very direct questions. And then things really, 2016-17, completely unspooled with his attacking people who were publishing the truth about his account and doing it in a way that you could bring into a court of law. Two of the ones he laid into the worst and made threats, at times physical threats toward, were Sasha Christie, a wonderful, decent woman here, and the great Alison Dunlop, one of Scotland's leading paranormal researchers, a lay minister, a therapist, and one of the kindest and most thoughtful people I've ever met, who worked for a year to bring Larry and I to Scotland to speak under the auspices of the University of Scotland. The day before we were supposed to speak, Larry threatened a woman online, and he was not allowed to speak. I had to double my talk. Ultimately, we stopped communicating. I brought all of this information to the attention of our publisher and said, you thought as much as I thought that we were participating in the publication of a nonfiction book, not a nonfiction book with a certain amount of fiction in it. You need to conduct your own investigation, and if you come to the conclusions that I have, and I say this with very mixed feelings, that book has to come out of print. And that is just what happened. The book went out of print. Larry protested, essentially has represented me as being bought off by forces against him. And we have had no contact for 5.5 years. I've gone forward in my work, peace of mind on it, and I felt this audience deserved at least this much of the account of what happened with a book that I am otherwise very proud of parts of and always will be. Thank you.